This video will review how to multiply monomials and polynomials. We'll start with monomials. A monomial is anything that is a single term. In this particular case, the 2x squared is a single term and the negative 5x to the fourth is a single term. Terms are separated by addition and subtraction, and because there's no addition or subtraction involved here, these are each one term. So the 2x squared is a monomial and the 5x to the fourth is a monomial. When we multiply these together, we need to remember that when you have all multiplication as your operation, we have something called the commutative property that allows us to rearrange the factors. So if I felt like it, I could rewrite the 2 times negative 5 next to each other, and I could rewrite the x squared times x to the fourth next to each other. And then I could just multiply the coefficients and multiply the factors that involve x. 2 times negative 5 is negative 10, and x squared times x to the fourth is x to the sixth. Then you need to remember that when you have like bases that are multiplied, you add the exponents. In the second example here, negative 3ab squared times negative 4a cubed b to the fifth, I can again rearrange the factors if I want to so that the coefficients are next to each other, the factors that involve an a are next to each other, and the factors that involve a b are next to each other. And then I'll multiply the like bases, and then I'll multiply the coefficients. So negative 3 times negative 4 is positive 12. If I multiply a times a cubed, remember that's a to the first times a cubed, so that's a to the fourth. And b squared times b to the fifth is b to the seventh. So after you do a few of these, most people don't rewrite it with the factors rearranged, but I'm just showing you that so you understand how you can group the like bases together. Now let's move on to an example where we multiply a monomial like 3x squared by a polynomial, 5x squared plus 10x minus 9. And this is actually called a trinomial because it has 3 terms. Well, basically what I do is I just distribute this monomial and I multiply it by each of the terms inside the parentheses. So I'm going to have 3x squared times 5x squared, and I'm going to have a 3x squared times a 10x minus a 3x squared times a 9. And then I've got 3 monomial multiplication problems in one. So for this first term, 3x squared times 5x squared, that's 15x to the fourth. For the second term, 3x squared times 10x, that would be 30x to the third. And for the last term, 3x squared times 9, that's going to be minus 27x squared. Let's look at another. Here's a monomial multiplied by a trinomial. And in this case, we have some negatives that we need to be careful about. So I'm taking this monomial of negative 4y and I'm distributing it to each of these terms. And anytime you distribute a negative, you need to be really careful. So in the first one, I'll have negative 4y times x cubed. Then I'll have the minus from this operation right here. And then I'll also have a negative 4y times 2xy squared. And the last term will be plus negative 4y times 3. And when you have all of these terms with all of these negatives, we'll be careful to end up with a single sign between the terms. So for the first one, negative 4y times x squared, that's going to be negative 4. Technically, it doesn't matter the order that you write your variables. The convention is to write them in alphabetical order, so I'm going to write negative 4x cubed y. For these second term here, the two negatives together are going to make a positive, and then I'll have 8. There's only one x, so that's an x, and then I've got a y to the first times a y to the second, so that's going to be a y cubed. And then for the last term, the plus a negative is going to make that a minus, and that's going to be 12y. So the final answer is negative 4x cubed y plus 8xy cubed minus 12y. That's a monomial times a polynomial. All right, let's move on to multiplication of two binomials. So if this problem didn't have this 3 here, and it was just x, this x multiplied by this x minus 4, it would look like this, x times x minus 4. Now, at the same time, if this x at the beginning wasn't here, and you just had the 3 multiplied by that x minus 4, you would have a plus 3 times x minus 4. So you take the first factor, or the first term, excuse me, multiplied by the entire second factor, and then you take the second term and multiply it by the entire second factor. And so what you end up with now, if I do distribution again, x times x is going to be x squared. X times minus 4 is minus 4x. 3 times x is plus 3x. 3 times... Now what you'll notice is that in the middle here you have like terms, so we want to combine those. So you get x squared minus x minus 12. So you'll notice that when I multiplied a binomial, I got a binomial times a binomial, I got a trinomial. Now one other way that I could show this, if you've ever seen the area model for multiplying polynomials, I can think of x plus 3 being the width on one side and x minus 4 being the length on the other side. And if I multiply the terms together, x times x gives me x squared, x times 3 gives me 3x, x times negative 4 gives me negative 4x, and negative 4 times 3 gives me negative 12. And you'll notice that the terms that I end up with inside the rectangle here are the same as the terms that I have up here. Now one last thing about this problem. Sometimes people use the term FOIL. And let me explain to you what that means. If you look at this x squared here, some people say that comes from multiplying the first term in each parentheses. So that came from the x times the x. And if you look at the minus 4x, some people say that comes from the outside. That came from this x times this minus 4. The 3x comes from multiplying the inside terms, and the minus 12 comes from multiplying the last terms, the 3 times the negative 4. So when you say first outside, inside, last, sometimes people call that FOIL, and it only works when you have two binomials multiplied together. Okay, let's look at one more binomial. So if I take this first term and I multiply it by both terms in the second set of parentheses, 2x times x is 2x squared, and 2x times negative 1 is negative 2x. or minus 2x. Then I'm going to come back and I'm going to take this second term, the minus 3, and now I'm going to multiply it by everything in the second set of parentheses. So negative 3 times x is going to be negative 3x, and negative 3 times negative 1 is going to be plus 3. And again, in this case, I end up with like terms in the middle, so I get 2x squared minus 5x plus 3. And this first 2x squared comes from the first terms, the minus 2x comes from the outside terms, the minus 3x comes from the inside terms, and the 3 comes from the last terms.